Coming up in this Pidgeot episode.
Hey, it's not okay that you only celebrate Lunar New Year at City Hall. For the last decade, we need to recognize Losar as well.
Recently, you passed a bill.
So Intro 100, what it does is it is the first ever Buddhist holiday that is recognized by the city of New York to say that alternate side parking will be suspended. So that way you as a family can focus on observing that holiday instead of running outside to move your car and looking for parking in a very, very busy street like New York City. Losar is a Tibetan American holiday and it is very important. It's celebrated by more than 61,000 New Yorkers. So if the Tibetan American community themselves is not sure what they want for themselves, no one else can tell you what you need. Is if you're not at the table in these conversations and you're not engaged, then you're on the menu. As in, you are up for grabs.
Welcome to Pidgeot Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Pidgeot Podcast. I'm Jimmy, your host, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Councilmember Julie Won. She is a very dedicated leader, and she has had many impact in her district as well as the broader community in New York City. I can't wait to dive more into our conversation, and thank you so much, Julie, for being here. Councilmember Won, thank you so much for being on Pidgeot today.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Thank you. So can we start by talking a bit about yourself and your work as a council member?
Sounds good. Tashidalek, it's so good to see you all. My name is Julie Won, and I'm currently the council member representing Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, and Astoria. I'm the first woman, the first Asian American, and the first immigrant to represent this district.
So how was your journey to be a council member, and is there like certain values that you go by or that drive your work?
It was really tough when I first ran. When I first ran in 2021, there were 18 people who were running, and it was extremely competitive.
And during COVID too.
And it was during COVID-19, but I was very lucky. I come from a non-traditional background for government or politics. I spent 10 years in a large tech company as a consultant, especially focusing on digital strategy and change management. And that kind of gave me a competitive advantage when I was running during COVID to understand the ecosystem of how social media can play a large part in a race like mine, especially with a district like mine where I have mostly younger voters that skew under the age of 45 who are very active and civically engaged. So at the time, it was right after the prior Trump presidency, and that actually banned on social media any sort of paid political ads.
Yeah.
So that meant as someone who was running as a politician for a government seat, I could only have organic growth and engagement and connections with voters. And that was something that I was very apt on doing. And I had a lot of volunteers from my team from my previous job who helped me with my design, with my strategy, as well as my branding and the social media engagement on how we have organic growth. And that's how we were able to really succeed. Obviously, we also had very good team members as well who, like my treasurer, who made sure that I didn't go to jail because, as you can see in the news, there's a lot of corruption in government. And I also had a really good field director who really understands data and targeting on how you win election. Who is my husband now. Yeah, well, we were already married. but yeah.
So that was about like how you were like campaigning for yourself, but has there been any personal experiences that has shaped you to run for council member?
There's a lot of experiences. For me, being a first generation immigrant, I think all of us really understand what it means to be invisible, especially as Asian Americans, but also understanding the hardships of what it's like to be hungry. For me, the reason that I ran for office is because I grew up on public school free lunch. And during COVID-19, Mayor de Blasio at the time came on TV and he said, schools are closed, but if you get free lunch, you can come and pick it up. And right away, I thought of myself when I was in 5th grade, and if there was a school holiday and schools were closed, that meant my parents were still working and they just closed the door. I didn't have childcare. My parents would be like, stay home, watch TV, read some books, draw, whatever, and eat whatever's in the fridge. And that sometimes meant, you add extra water to your ramen so that there's more than enough for you and your sibling to share so that you're not hungry. So that's what drove me to call all the people that I knew in the nonprofit space and say, hey, do you know where I can get free food to do meal deliveries for families that are going to go hungry? So I partnered with Rethink Foods and we started delivering hundreds and thousands of meals throughout COVID at Ravenswood houses and Queensbridge houses. And that's when I made a connection with a little girl who would sit at a bus stop every single day for hours and hours on end. And I realized it was because I was the only way she can go to school on the internet because she didn't have internet at home.
Oh.
So she would use Link NYC to get free Wi-Fi. And that really made me angry. Because as someone who worked in tech, I knew that with $20 or less, I can get a hotspot for each family that would give them high-speed internet for more than 11 devices. And the government at the time was sitting at more than $150 million for broadband internet access, and they were doing nothing about it. And I called every single elected official, asked them what they were doing, and they said that it's not a priority for them, but that it's on their list of things to do, that they'll look into it. So I started advocating for these children, and then think about during COVID. If you didn't have internet,
Everything was online. Yeah.
exactly, your healthcare was online, your school was online, government services like DMV to renew your license was online. And if everything is on the internet, it should be treated just like our utilities of electricity, heat, and hot water, a basic necessity that people should have despite their income level. And that's how I ended up running for office because people were like, if you're so mad about it, why don't you do it yourself? And then I was like, what? I don't know how to run for office.
So the food thing and advocacy happens before you ran for council member.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
what drove me to run because food insecurity is something that nobody should have to face in the richest country, in the richest city of the world. And basic necessities that we have to modernize. In my home country in Korea, if you go to the subway system, if you go outside, everywhere there's free internet. But still, as a city, we're not there yet.
I think it's also because like New York City and the subway system here is like too vast, but there's definitely like some aspects we can continue working on. So that was about like you running for the office. Now let's fast forward to recently you passed a bill, Intro 100. So can you talk a bit about what it is, how like the idea came up, and how was the journey to pass it?
Yeah, for me, it's being the first woman, the first immigrant, and the first Asian American to represent an Asian plurality district. I came here to represent my community. During COVID-19, we faced an immense amount of anti-Asian hate, a lot of violence, verbally, physically, emotionally. And I wanted to make sure that we prioritized making sure that the least visible communities became the focus of our legislation. So for me, when I had the chance to make sure that Losar is represented, I've always had Tibetan staff. I'm really lucky. I have Keisang Yanso on my staff now. Prior to, I had Tenzin, who also was with us. And Sam Tenzin is now with the mayor's office. But it was the first time that during our first Lunar New Year celebration at City Hall that Tenzin made sure that there was a Losar component to it. So we had a Tibetan community center come and do the dance. That was traditional to Tibetan community members. And that in itself, even though it was with Asian American members, we still had to do a lot of education to tell them what is Losar and why is it significant, who celebrates it. And that's what really made us think about at large, what can we do to increase the education and awareness level of what the Himalayan community celebrates, what Tibetan Americans care about, and why it's important. So Intro 100, what it does is it is the first ever Buddhist holiday that is recognized by the city of New York to say that alternate side parking will be suspended. So that way you as a family can focus on observing that holiday instead of running outside to move your car and looking for parking in a very, very busy street like New York City, especially in Woodside where the Tibetan Community Center is. It's almost impossible to find parking. So allowing them to focus on celebrating and not being worried about punitive fines and helping New Yorkers overall understand. Because once you have holidays like Easter, Christmas, and you have Columbus Day or whatever it may be, then you now have put it on the map to say Losar is a Tibetan American holiday celebrated by Buddhists from the Himalayan region, and it is very important. It's celebrated by more than 61,000 New Yorkers, and it helps them understand, and it's put it into their brain. Now people will say Losar. Okay, that's like a Himalayan Lunar New Year to the best of their understanding.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially when we were celebrating, I think it's like in not only Asian community, but most of the community, when it's festival, it's like family time. So you don't want to like run out. It's like make circles around the community to just like make around. And I'm sure like this bill really made the Tibetan community feel seen. And I remember like a week or a few days ago, there was a big celebration, sort of, in City Hall when the bill was passed. So what was it like during that day? I saw a lot of clips. Unfortunately, I was not able to be there, but I saw a lot of clips where there were a lot of community members. I heard like the city hall was filled with Tibetan, and there were Tibetan outside the city hall too.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone was so happy. So what was it like that day?
For inside City Hall, when stated meeting happens, a stated meeting is when we pass laws into execution, saying that this has now officially become law, from an idea to American, like New York City law. And that day when we voted on it, the chambers where we all sit, the elected officials, above there's a balcony where visitors can come and watch. And that every single seat was filled by someone who was in support of Intro 100, primarily from the Tibetan community, but we also had support from the Nepali community, from the Bhutanese community, and also from South Asian, like from Indian community members. And it was really beautiful to see. So you would see flags. We saw a Tibetan flag, a Nepali flag, a Bhutanese flag, and we also had Indian support as well. So that unity of AAPIs or Asian American Pacific Islanders was really powerful to see. And it also reinforces the importance of recognizing this holiday as the first ever Buddhist holiday too, because we had to have multiple conversations internally to tell them, look, you can't just stop at these like pseudo Christian, like only Christian holidays and Jewish holidays. You have to be inclusive, because the government itself is a little bit deterred from passing any more alternate side parking laws, because it affects the cleanliness of our streets, and that's understandable.
Yeah.
But just because somebody came first, which is a lot of Christian beliefs and Christian holidays, doesn't mean that you can't just leave out a Buddhist holiday because we are newer Americans, or we've recently arrived here. So, but it was a beautiful celebration to see, and for my colleagues to see it physically, of understanding how important this holiday is. That really weighed on them when they were really proud, being like, wow, we did something that was meaningful and powerful for a community that has not been recognized before in these chambers.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. I heard a lot of stories from other Tibetans that day, and they were like, this really makes us feel so good, because especially in your district, in Woodside, and Astoria is where like a lot of Tibetans reside in. So they were like, oh my god, our district do see us, like we're being seen. So you have been a strong friend of Tibetan community and Tibetan people in general. I've seen you I think 2 times in Momo Crawl too. You were always there.
Yeah.
And I've seen you multiple times around different occasions. So how do you think the city can better help the Tibetan New Yorkers?
Well, the city serves all of us, and it's about how we organize to advocate to meet our needs. So there's many ways that you could get civically engaged. One very obvious way is electing people who represent you. And if that is someone who is a Tibetan American who can run for office one day, amazing. Like, let's get them elected. If it is an ally like me who recognizes and understands the Tibetan experience, because as a Korean American, I grew up my whole life listening to my grandmother who talked about Japanese occupation in Korea, where we were not able to speak Korean. Her Korean name was taken away from her, and she was given a Japanese name. Even until the day she died, she only knew how to read and write in Japanese, but was never allotted the education to learn how to read and write Korean, because you would be punished very punitively if a public school taught that. That is heartbreaking. And my grandmother would always instill in me of how important freedoms are and how important sovereignty is for a nation, and how to preserve the language. Because even when I moved here, she would cry so much at the airport and be like, don't forget your language. Don't forget Korean. And when I was a college student, His Holiness spoke at my university, the Dalai Lama.
Mhm.
And hearing that story, it seems like there's a common theme in my life where it makes me angry.
Yeah.
So, like the same way, not having food or having internet made me angry, hearing about the plight of the Tibetan diaspora made me really upset because for decades to pass since what the Japanese have done or what the Germans did to the Jewish community or any other community like what we're seeing with the Uyghurs or the Tibetans, it's not okay that we continue to allow these human rights violations to go on even in the year of 2025. And through these connections of personal experiences and the lived experiences that you all have, you will continue to have connections with others who may not be Tibetan, but recognize the power that you have in your community and the mission that you're living for. So I think it's really important to build your network, support people who are running for office if it's not someone from your own community who is running, and also get organized because it's not enough to just elect people. You guys could have just stopped at being like, we helped Julie get elected. Like we petitioned for her, we stood at poll sites for her, told people to vote for her. But then if you don't tell me, like, hey, we want to see laws that recognize us as Buddhist, like Tibetan Buddhists, of our holidays to be reflected on the New York City calendar, then we could have just done nothing. Or if I didn't have advocacy from a Tibetan staffer being like, hey, it's not okay that you only celebrate Lunar New Year at City Hall for the last decade. We need to recognize Losar as well. So the advocacy part is making sure that especially young people, university students and other adults are getting together and even school age children saying, hey, I want to see this change to make sure that I'm reflected in these laws and these policies and that I am recognized as a New Yorker. And that's when we can start working together to say, okay, that's a great idea. So how do we make that into law? And that's where our experts come in. We're on my team. We have Nellie and we also have my chief of staff, Nick, and everyone else that is here to work together to make sure that we are changing the way that our city operates to reflect the beauty and the preservation of Tibetan culture and the language and the mission that you're on to free Tibet.
Your office staffs are like really, I think they really work, especially Nick. When I first heard him speak Tibetan, I was like, whoa. So I feel like we did touch a bit on this, but in recent years, especially Tibetan in America and Canada have been very active in advocacy, and there's a lobby day that they go to the Capitol in DC, and I think currently like a lot of college students and especially the youths are trying really hard to advocate and do lobbying and things. We did touch a bit, but is there like any specific advice you would give to, as a lawmaker, specific advice you would give to students who are like currently active but still to like make a bigger impact?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not, it's important to make sure that you're organizing and preparing a pipeline of leaders who can become elected officials one day. But until you have someone who's elected, make sure that you know who your champions are. Like, for example, Jim McGovern in Congress, he's a huge champion for you all. You have to support him, make sure that he is always going to win re-election. But further than that, making sure that he is your champion by meeting with him and having a clear ask of saying, these are the things that we need to make sure that we are recognized or that we are not invisibilized or that there is no more human rights violations in China against Tibetan Americans. Here are the things that we can do, whether that's sanctions or there's whatever it may be from a legal perspective that Jim may be able to champion. That's really important. But in addition to that, no legislator can do anything by themselves. It's always coalition building and having a caucus of people who feel the same way. So identify that one champion for yourself, but then also organize with that champion to say, let's identify if, for example, at city council, I'm going to need 36 votes to be veto proof against the mayor. So that means that I can work with you to say, hey, here are a list of 40 people so that we can get to 36 at minimum that we can meet with, where you can call, where you can show up to the office, where you can do letter writing campaigns, you could do email writing campaigns, you could do phone calls, you could do social media campaigns, asking them to be with us, to support us and be on the right side of history.
How do you see local government fostering like a more inclusive and equitable New York City?
I think local government, we've made a lot of progress. We went from a majority white, majority male council to now majority female, 31 female members, and majority people of color and working class. So inclusivity starts with the representation that we have, because if the people that are representing us are not actually representative of our lived experiences or who we are as an identity, it's extremely difficult. Sometimes we do get lucky with Jim McGovern, where he's a white man, but he truly understands the plight of Tibetan Americans, but it's rare. So to get adequate representation, it really comes down to advocacy. So I really want young people to understand how the legislative process works, how a bill as an idea becomes into law, which goes through a hearing. A bill is introduced and written, then it has a hearing where people can come and testify. The way that for Intro 100, we had a hearing for it, and Tibetan Americans came to testify and also sent in more than 1,000 testimonies in writing to say, we support this law. Because if not enough people support it, that law will not pass. So making sure that you understand the processes of how the legislative process works and getting involved at the right time in the right manner, and you have to be focused. So if the Tibetan American community themselves is not sure what they want for themselves, no one else can tell you what you need. You need to be able to say, even if you're not sure how you would resolve a problem by law, because you're not a lawyer or you're not a bill drafter, you don't work at the city hall council, but you need to be able to say, hey, Julie, or hey, council member, or hey, congress member, I as a Tibetan American, or we as Tibetan Americans have this problem, and we require your help for this to be resolved. And the solution may have varying different answers, but until you identify what problem it is that can be solved, no one can tell you what that problem is, and they can't foresee it for you. So it really comes down to you all talking to each other and organizing, saying 150 of us want this problem resolved, which in this case was 150,000 of us, or like 61,000 of us, are sick and tired of having to move our cars on the day of Losar because it is not recognized as a real holiday in the city of New York, when we could be focused on making more momos or praying or whatever it may be. And they may not have realized, oh, okay, we can just legislate that into law, but at least we knew what the problem was. So it's really having a lot of conversations internally amongst your community members saying, hey, what is a really big problem that we have an issue with? Like, what's really painful for us, and how can we solve it? And you may not know the answer, but you have other people in your network who can champion this for you, who will help you find the answer and solution.
So, Tibetan being an immigrant community, there are a lot of other underrepresented immigrant community in your district. So, I was watching a few of your campaign videos, and you talk a lot about supporting small business, because a lot of immigrant family own small business in different areas. So, what other aspect do you think can support those immigrant families, like the underrepresented especially?
For our office, we are looking to make sure, right now we have a free housing lawyer that gives you legal services, because all of us have to pay rent, right? Most of us are renters. Or even if you're a homeowner, if you have any legal issues for your housing, you can speak to our housing lawyer to get free consultation to understand your best path forward. In addition to that, starting probably from the summertime, we're fighting for funding now to have immigrant services in our office, where an immigration lawyer will be here to give you consultation anonymously or within confidentiality, in case that you are undocumented or you're a green card holder or you're on a visa, that you have a path forward and you understand what your options are. Thirdly, for small businesses, we partner with people like organizations like a company capital or local bids. And there's also government agencies that offer these services, like small business services. We partner with these government agencies that give you free consultations, that may have access to grants, who may also understand how to maneuver a lot of these summons or fines that you may have, or requirements, regulations that change, like outdoor dining, to help you navigate these spaces. But even within that, we're continuing to fight to have Tibetan recognized as a language that requires their materials to be translated. Because if these business owners are getting notifications in English saying you no longer have access to outdoor dining on roads, on the roadside, if you don't speak English, are you gonna read that notice? You may not, and then you may just get a fine after when you have not followed the law.
Yeah, and also like we talked a bit about housing, small business. What do you think is like the most pressing challenge in your district currently?
It's housing. It's affordable housing. Yeah.
So
More than 50% are rent burdened, which means that you're using most of your income to pay for rent.
we talked about a lot of issues that you and your office is working on. And also as a college student, sometimes we have like a lot of stuff. How do you prioritize? Like, okay, we need to focus on this first. Okay, this can like maybe a little bit of less care, but this needs to be prioritized. How do you like decide on prioritizing?
Just like how 911, any sort of government agency, you have to triage because the need is so great. There's 185,000 people that we serve, and we have a team of 7 people and volunteers. So we can't solve everything. It's understanding, one, if it's an emergency, you have to call 911. Secondly, if there are issues that come in, we have to think about what is the most current in the spectrum of current events, what is the most dire issue that puts people at risk. And right now, with the current Trump administration, for us, it's the undocumented immigrants who live here who are at dire risk, or for trans people who live here, trans New Yorkers who are at dire risk because they're being targeted by its own government, and that persecution is unfair and it's not okay. We still live in a sanctuary city, so we're doing know your rights trainings to help them understand what their rights are and protecting people to the best of our abilities. But for us, we need to make sure that we're looking at the current events. We read the news every single day, and we have to triage by whatever is of the highest importance, and everything else. If you're not going to die or get deported tomorrow, you're going to have to wait.
And so I think we talked a lot about that we need to be engaged, that young people need to advocate and raise their voice. How would you encourage youths who are there are I think a lot of youths who are like, yeah, there are people who care, so I don't care. But I think like everyone should at least think about or at least have awareness of what's going around and try to be involved. At least by reading news or like being updated. How would you encourage those youths to be involved?
If you're not involved, I think the easiest way to put it is if you're not at the table in these conversations and you're not engaged, then you're on the menu. As in, you are up for grabs as not important. Right now, refugee resettlement has been completely halted. How have Tibetan Americans been able to seek asylum here? It's as refugees from political prosecution. If you yourself are not engaged as someone who is a direct beneficiary of that program, guess what? Now all of your future ancestors, like your lineage from Tibet who are currently surviving, who may want to escape, best of luck to them. This is extremely serious, and people have to understand, even if it's unpleasant, you have to read the news. And not all of our news outlets are very honest, but even knowing at the minimum of what is happening, what policy changes are being enacted, is going to be vital for the survival of our humankind and democracy. So that way, people are understanding when do we start organizing to make sure that people who don't represent us, which are the billionaires and fascists who think that they're in an oligarchy, that they are not having a free reign on our country because no one is bothering to care or notice.
So, we talk about like a lot of different challenges that the city as well as your district is facing. But if there's like one change like you would really, really want to bring to the city or your district except for housing, what would it be?
Well, I'm still hoping that New York City will figure out a way to make sure that we have free internet access. Right now, in my district alone, we have free internet and free cable TV for all of our NYCHA residents, so people who are 200% below the poverty line. But for other districts, that is not the case. That means that there are still people living in low income housing and they still don't have internet access. And a lot of the COVID programs that were once federally funded, like through the DOE, where you get a free tablet, where you're going to have internet, those were taken away last December. And the federal program where you got a discount through the Affordable Connectivity Program was also discontinued. And I have no doubt that now, with the billionaire class leading our country with no qualms for the working class, they are not at all prioritizing internet access for low income folks.
So, we have talked a lot about what you and your office are doing. How do you think the people in your district specifically can help you and your office? So we talked a lot about like general stuff, how they can raise their voice for their community, for their for immigrant families, but in broader community. But how can you're doing a lot for us? So how can we help you and your
I think there's always two sides of an elected official. So the first one is the political side. In order for me to stay in office, I have to fundraise. Every single year, I have to raise at least $120,000 to be in office. And that is why you don't really see people of color or immigrants in these seats or working class people, because with the money that I fundraise, I can't pay for my rent. I can't pay for food. It's only for my campaign because that means I have to print materials. I have to print sheets to be on the ballot. There's something called petitioning. So it's really important that in June 24th, people come out to vote for me again. And then in November, there's a general election. So there's a primary to say the Democratic Party chooses this person. And then there's a general election in November saying that I am officially going to win to take office again in January. So that's the political side. So volunteering, donating, and voting, those are the three main things. So when you think about any elected official or politician, always remember the ways you can help them is number one, vote for them, because that's how they keep their seat. Two, donate to them, even if it's $10, it goes a long way with cities matching funds. And then thirdly, volunteering, because a lot of what we do, we have to work really hard to get on the ballot. We have to work really hard to make sure people remember to vote, knocking doors, calling people, phone banking. So it's a whole campaign. And then secondly, on the government side, that's a whole other beast in itself. We have a very small team, as you can see, of about 7 people and volunteers and interns to run a district that represents 185,000 people. And we see ourselves as not just representing this district, but also a representation for immigrants at large, as well as the Asian American Pacific Islander community. We have a very fast growing Himalayan community. We have a very fast growing Bangladeshi community. We have one of the largest Filipino community members, and you see that represented in our district, Ecuadorian, Colombian. So we have a very diverse district. But that means that there's not enough of us on government funding to work here. And even the ones that work here, we take very low salaries to be here. So we need a lot of help of people who are willing to help us, whether it be communications, to help us make social media graphics to get the word out. Being like, do you know your rights? Things like that. And then also for constituent services, people that can help us pick up all the phone calls, go through all the voicemails of people requesting our help, and processing them with government agencies to say this agency will help you get your HRA benefits. To our legislation, how do we create all of these ideas to make them into law? That also requires a lot of support. And then we also have land use, of how we decide how our land is used for real estate, whether it be a housing building, a commercial building for office space, or manufacturing, etc. So and then there's also city budget. We pass a budget of more than $118 billion. So understanding how we use that money, how we negotiate that money, that in itself is a lot of work, and participatory budgeting. So there's a lot of aspects of what a government office does that people can volunteer for or try to work for or support in any way. Like even for Losar, we're going to be bringing more than 200 gifts to the Tibetan Community Center. That all had to be picked up and dropped off from our nonprofit partners by volunteer drivers. So even doing little things, being like, I have a car, I can help you, that goes such a long way.
So we've talked a lot about different topics, from your personal journey to the Tibetan community and the broader community in New York City. So to not sum up, but any final message to our listeners?
I think for me, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful and thankful to the Che. I think I can't even imagine what my journey as an elected official here would be like. without the support of the Tibetan American community. And I've learned so much about compassion and kindness, forgiveness and mercy. I will never forget, especially when Dolma, a young girl in my community, was run over by a car and died. I think she was 8 or 6. She was very, very young.
When was this? Like
This was in
2
Astoria, yeah, within my second year in office. As a mom of 2 young kids, that is soul crushing. And to look at the parent's face, especially the father, and he said, I don't want to sue. I don't want to press charges. I just want to make sure that there is adequate changes in the infrastructure, that there is a stoplight there so that no other child ever dies like this. A stop sign is not enough.
Oh.
So that kind of compassion, that kind of generosity and forgiveness is very rare. It is not common, especially in times of grief and sadness with such great loss. And that kind of example that he has set, where I know from NYPD to the Department of Transportation to senators' offices, assembly offices, those who have witnessed that kind of belief, and to also sit in the Tibetan Community Center as the prayers were given up by the monks and all the families that were there, that is a very rare occurrence. That is long-lasting impression of what Tibetan Buddhism is and what the Tibetan culture is like and what the people of Tibet are like. So those are the things that you have all taught me that I will always cherish and carry with my heart.
Yeah, I feel like compassion is something that really improves our strength. Because growing up in my family, my grandparents used to be like, "Oh, don't kill the bug," because it might have been your parents or like your close kin in your past life. And there's this very popular scene in the movie 7 Years in Tibet where they're building a phone house, but then while they're digging the soil, they see a lot of earthworms. So what the monks do is they pick every earthworms in a bowl, and then they're putting them in other soil where the building is not being built. So it's like every life matters. And I sort of remember that while you were talking. So thank you so much, Councilmember One. I'm personally like truly very grateful. Like, you're really inspiring. I'm a Tibetan. I live in Woodside. I go to college in Long Island City. So it's like I'm really under your leadership, and your leadership is truly, truly inspiring. All that you do for the Tibetan community as well as the broader community in the city, in your district, is truly very inspiring. And thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you to all the staff for being here for almost an hour. Yeah, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on our podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'll see you soon.